Apache Pass, Arizona, February 3, 1861. As the winter chill cuts the air outside, the legendary Apache warrior Cochise sits inside of a canvas tent, his eyes darting towards the thin walls as he becomes increasingly unnerved by the behavior of his host, Lieutenant George Bascom. He has agreed to this meeting with Bascom under the pretense of a peaceable negotiation, but now Cochise is being accused of a number of heinous crimes, including theft and the kidnapping of a local farm boy named Felix Ward. As Bascom finishes his list of charges being leveled against Cochise, Cochise's anger begins to rise. He did not commit these crimes, he protests, and he even offers to help find the Ward boy. But his words fall on deaf ears. He is told that he is to be arrested and held until the missing boy is returned. Cochise's brother, Kayuntura, sits next to him, his disgust with the Americans' trickery also growing by the second. Outside, Cochise's wife and 2 children, as well as 2 other Apache warriors, all accompanying Cochise on this ostensible peace meeting, are growing increasingly nervous at the obviously rising tensions within the tent. The soldiers around them also seem to be growing more and more apprehensive as they see their commander's treacherous plan unfolding. Back inside the tent, Lieutenant Bascom orders the 2 guards manning the door to arrest Cochise. Within a few moments, the 2 soldiers are moving across the tent, their arms outstretched towards Cochise in order to apprehend him. Now, Cochise knows that his options are limited. He must either escape this tent, or he will be held here against his will by the United States Army. In a flash, the Apache warrior brandishes the large hunting knife he keeps tucked in his belt and lunges for the back wall of the tent. In one smooth motion, he slashes a hole in the canvas wall and escapes out of the tent, followed closely by Kayuntura. But Kayuntura catches his foot on either the edge of the tent or a rock just outside of the tent and tumbles to the ground, where he is quickly captured by the soldiers that are chasing him. While this unfolds, Cochise runs at a full sprint, running for a nearby ridgeline. Seeing Cochise barrel out of the back of the tent, his family and fellow warriors outside quickly discern that something has gone terribly wrong, and they attempt to follow Cochise. But Cochise's wife and 2 children are quickly restrained by the soldiers surrounding them. The 2 warriors, likely nephews of Cochise, both attempt to flee, but one is run entirely through by a soldier's bayonet and pinned down to the ground. The other manages to shirk off his army guards and follow Cochise towards the ridgeline. Now, Lieutenant Bascom orders his men to fire, and over 50 bullets fill the air, slamming into the trees and rocks all around Cochise. One of these bullets hits the younger Apache warrior in his back, killing him almost instantly. Another slams into the lower leg of Cochise, but his wound is not serious, and he manages to run on, miraculously taking cover before disappearing into the surrounding landscape in classic Apache fashion. But despite his miraculous escape, Cochise knows that he is in dire straits. Not only is he now injured and alone, but his wife, children, brother, and a fellow Apache warrior are now in the custody of Lieutenant Bascom and the U.S. Army. Despite his notoriously stoic personality, Cochise is terrified at what might happen to them. But he knows that his only choice now is to make his way back to his village and assemble his fellow warriors to wage an attack on these soldiers here at this camp, and especially on their treacherous, arrogant commander, Lieutenant George Bascom. Back in his tent, its wall now fluttering in the wind, Bascom knows that he, too, is now in dire straits. He had planned to arrest Cochise and possibly a few of the other warriors that he might bring with him, but he had not planned for Cochise to bring his wife and children. And he had certainly not anticipated arresting them. Now, with the acrid smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air, he realizes that he has arrested or killed everyone but Cochise. And now, he and his men are here in the middle of Apache territory, and they are essentially surrounded. and he knows that it will be only a matter of time before Cochise and his warriors return for his family. And when they do, he knows that they will unleash a fury that he and his men have likely never seen before. As he takes stock of this situation, Bascom wonders how things could have gone so wrong. The plan had been a simple one: lure Cochise into a meeting on the premise of peace talks and then arrest him for the kidnapping of a local farm boy by the name of Felix Ward. He would then hold Cochise and any fellow warriors and then use them as a bargaining chip for the release of the captured boy. But there were a number of issues with Bascom's plan. First, he had, obviously, not foreseen the possibility of Cochise bringing along his family. Second, he had gravely underestimated the consequences of what he had initially viewed as merely a law enforcement operation. Bascom had seen this as a simple matter of luring in a criminal and then arresting that criminal in a simple police action that would be of little trouble to a West Point graduate such as himself. Now, it seems all too likely to Bascom and to his men that they may very likely have started a war. Finally, in perhaps his biggest mistake, the young lieutenant had underestimated Cochise himself. For Cochise, even amongst a warrior tribe such as the Chiricahua Apache, is seen as a man not to be trifled with. In his 40-odd years of life, he has accumulated a record in his actions during raiding and in warfare that very few men, even amongst the Apache, could ever rival. With an imposing build, a serious demeanor, a laconic tongue, and a notorious temper, Cochise is a living legend even amongst the Chiricahua. But at this time in 1861, he is all but unknown to the Americans. To Lieutenant Bascom and his superiors, this is just another troublesome Apache, one guilty of horse thievery and of absconding with a local child, an occurrence all too common on the frontier, and he is certainly not a legendary warrior and leader of men. But now, Bascom and the whole of the U.S. Army are about to learn of Cochise's fury. As Cochise's captured family screams in protest, and several soldiers retrieve the body of the unfortunate warrior who had attempted to follow Cochise into the mountains, a cold chill seems to go down the spine of Bascom and all of his men. A chill caused not by the frigid winds, but by the realization that they have all kicked a proverbial hornet's nest and that the consequences may be dire. With this new reality setting in, Bascom orders his men to gather their supplies and to fall back to the nearby stage station, a small building not far from the site of the meeting. Here, the men circle their supply wagons, reinforce their defenses, and sequester their captives away in a small room. By nightfall, their work is finished, and many among them feel that they have created a formidable defensive structure that even the most formidable of attacking Apache forces would struggle to overrun. But, just as the sun sets, the men inside the stage station see a chilling sight, one that renews their fear of just what kind of Apache attack is to come. Dotting the mountains all around them, they see small fires, dozens of them easily visible in the darkness. These, they realize, are Apache signal fires. Cochise, it seems, has already started spreading the word about the Army's treachery. For his part, Lieutenant Bascom begins to wonder, however briefly, if perhaps Cochise had been telling the truth. Perhaps it was the Coyoteros who had kidnapped the boy, and, possibly, Cochise had no knowledge at all of the taking of Felix Ward. After all, it is not as if the Coyotero report each and every raid they commit to the Chiricahua. But still, in his view, Bascom had little choice but to at least attempt to hold Cochise for ransom. If he had let Cochise and his family go, they may very well have never returned at all, and Bascom would have no leads on where to find the boy. And this would undoubtedly leave a stain on Bascom's military record that would be difficult to expunge. The young lieutenant had undoubtedly been confronted with a particularly difficult situation. one which required an in-depth knowledge of intertribal relations, of territorial geopolitics, of local history, and a command of the language as well as superior negotiation skills. Bascom had to make the best decisions he could while being a relatively young officer, completely inexperienced in combat. He is only marginally familiar with Apache tribal history and the tribe's inner workings, as well as the recent history of the area. And, to add to his difficulties, he was communicating with Cochise through an interpreter who was both personally involved in the matter and barely functional in the language being translated. But now, all Bascom and his men can do is sit here within the walls of their ad hoc fort and wait. Meanwhile, having arrived at his village and having sent out word to the surrounding villages that his family has been taken hostage, Cochise now steels himself in his own anger. He has not only been accused of crimes that he did not commit, but now these careless, subversive Americans have killed one of his own and are currently holding his family hostage. He runs the events of the day through his head again and again, himself trying to figure out exactly how things could have gone so wrong. He had arrived that morning with his family, in jovial spirits and looking forward to a productive, peaceable meeting between Bascom and himself. Upon his arrival, Bascom had invited him into his spacious tent in order to enjoy a cup of coffee. But once inside, Cochise and his brother Coyotera were introduced to a man they did not recognize, a local rancher named John Ward. Ward was to act as the interpreter for this meeting, speaking to the Apache in Spanish, a language most of them were fluent in. But Ward would prove to be a regrettable choice for this role for two reasons. Reason one, it was in fact his son, Felix Ward, who had been kidnapped from his farm. Now, understandably agitated and believing himself to be speaking to his son's captors, Ward found it difficult to maintain his composure. And reason number two, Ward was barely serviceable in the Spanish language, having learned it from his Mexican wife. This presented a dangerous skill gap in a situation that depended entirely on precise, respectful, and cordial communication between both parties. Thus, the situation had seemed strained and tense from the moment Cochise and Coyotera had entered the tent. Once inside, all pretense of a peaceable meeting over coffee had quickly been disposed of. Within minutes, it seemed that a visibly frustrated Bascom was unleashing a tirade of charges towards the two Apache, accusing them of raiding, thievery, and kidnapping, with all of this translated in broken Spanish by way of the aggrieved father. Cochise and his brother had both protested vehemently and truthfully that they had nothing to do with these recent raids, nor the taking of the young Ward boy. They had offered up that it was likely the Coyotero Apache, a neighboring band, who were in fact responsible. Further still, they had offered to journey to where the Coyotero were and barter for the release of the boy, if Bascom would only grant them 10 days in which to do this. But Bascom staunchly refused all such offers, and instead ordered both men inside the tent to be placed under arrest until the hostage boy was returned. Now, the entire volatile situation had deteriorated to this, with his wife and children being held captive, and Cochise now wondering if he will ever see them again. But every pang of fear in the Apache warrior's heart is quickly diluted by his emanating hatred for Bascom and those responsible. The next morning, back at the stage station, the soldiers under Bascom's command awaken to another frigid dawn, one that sees the fog of their breaths hang heavy in the air. Suddenly, not long after sunrise, sentries on the south side of the stage station shout out that a group of Apache are approaching. They also report that they are carrying a white flag of truce. The Apache group reaches shouting distance of the southern wall and reports to the soldiers that Cochise would like to talk with Lieutenant Bascom. This is an incredibly dangerous proposition for Bascom, and he well knows it. Venturing out into the open in order to meet with Cochise could very well mean certain death, but considering the alternatives, he feels he has little else in the way of good options. So, within a few minutes of the Apache being spotted, Lieutenant Bascom, John Ward, Sergeant Daniel Robinson, and a sergeant by the name of Smith walk out to meet with Cochise. About 100 yards away from the stage station, they are met by 2 Apache warriors, a chief from a neighboring Apache band, and, of course, Cochise himself. For his part, Cochise knows that, despite his festering rage, the soldiers have indeed created a formidable defensive position, one that he did not expect, and one that he feels will cost many Apache lives to attack. The sacrificing of many warriors in order to capture an objective is not at all part of the Apache strategy for warfare, and thus Cochise has chosen to seek a parley. But the meeting is tense, terse, and essentially a replaying of their last conversation. Cochise demands that his family be returned, and Bascom demands the return of the captured boy. Cochise says that he does not have the boy, and Bascom responds that he will not release Cochise's family until he does. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Americans back at the stage station watch on for several minutes, hopeful that a peace might be reached, but growing more and more nervous as the impasse between Cochise and Bascom becomes more and more apparent to all. Finally, 3 civilian teamsters who are employees of the Butterfield Stagecoach Company named James Wallace, Charles Culver, and a man known only to history as Welch, venture out from the stage station, heading towards the site of the parley meeting. James Wallace has spent years in and around Apache Pass working as a stagecoach driver for the Butterfield stage line, and he believes that he has a cordial, trusting relationship with Cochise. His hope is that he can be of some assistance in negotiating for peace terms with the Apache. But he is wrong. As the 3 men are about halfway to the site of the meeting, Wallace suddenly spots a beautiful Apache woman named Juanita beckoning to them from a ravine off to their right. Juanita is the object of desire for many of the men in the area, and Wallace is no exception, having developed an affinity and possibly some kind of relationship with the Apache maiden. Her appearance piques Wallace's interest, and he and his 2 companions veer from their course, now heading to the ravine to meet with Juanita in hopes of leveraging her goodwill in these negotiations. But just as they reach the ravine where Juanita stands, Apache warriors who have been hiding in the brush and behind rocks in the ravine suddenly pounce upon Wallace, Culver, and Welch. Juanita herself grabs Wallace and drags him to the ground, where a number of young Apache warriors swarm around him, pinning him down. As Wallace struggles, Culver and Welch both make a break for the safety of the stage station. They sprint towards the safety of their comrades, making a desperate bid to save their own lives, but Welch is cut down by a bullet, possibly several bullets to his back. Culver is struck in the back, but manages to make it back to the stage station, though he is seriously wounded. As the ambush of their comrades unfolds, Bascom, Ward, Robinson, and Smith now make a desperate sprint themselves back to the circled wagons of the stage station. As they do, the surrounding landscape now seems to explode with hundreds of Apache warriors all raining bullets and arrows down upon the Americans and filling the air with ferocious war cries. Bascom and his party do manage to make it back to the stage station alive. Though Smith is wounded, it proves not to be serious. But now, it is obvious to Bascom and to his men alike that they are now surrounded, cut off from resupply or reinforcement, and in an even more dire predicament than they had initially realized. They hunker down inside the stage station, with the soldiers and teamsters growing more and more terrified. Meanwhile, still confined to a small room inside the stage station, Cochise's wife, children, brother, and fellow Apache warrior grow more and more assured that their captors will soon suffer the wrath of their Chiricahua brethren. As the day wears on and the sun finally sets, the soldiers again see the surrounding hillsides dotted with Apache fires. And now, they hear the Apaches singing and chanting their war songs, casting an even more eerie pall over the already unsettling experience. The soldiers spend another restless, chilly night attempting to both keep themselves warm and to steel their nerves for the fight to come, though few of them find any success in doing either. The next morning breaks, another cold, frightful dawn illuminating the terrible circumstances of the men in the stage station. Early in the day, Sergeant Daniel Robinson courageously volunteers to lead a squad of soldiers and their horses and mules to a spring roughly 1,000 yards away from the fort. This incredibly dangerous mission is a necessity, as water supplies inside the stage station have continued to dwindle, and all among this group expect to be ambushed by the Apache at any point. But miraculously, they return unharmed, the Apache having left them completely unbothered. For a few brief hours, Bascom takes this as a hopeful sign that perhaps a peaceful parley can indeed be struck. But then, in the afternoon, Cochise himself appears atop a nearby hill. With him, standing beaten and ragged and being led by a rope around his neck, is James Wallace. From his perch atop the hill, Cochise shouts down to Bascom that he now has an American hostage of his own with which to barter for the release of his family. In the hopes of sweetening the deal, Cochise also offers to return the 16 government mules that he has managed to capture. But Bascom remains unmoved. Though he certainly agonizes over the choice to leave Wallace with the Apache, he still staunchly believes that the only resolution to this standoff will come by way of the return of the captured ward boy. With his terms again refused, Cochise again stalks off, even more infuriated, and leading the terrified Wallace down the backside of the hill by his rawhide leash. Now, Cochise vows, Bascom and his men will feel the full weight of his vengeance. But the full story of what will come to be known to history as the Bascom Affair is too much to share here in one episode. Thus, this is a two-part episode. The conclusion to this story will see terrifying combat, brutal tactics, horrifying tortures, and the beginning of what will come to be known as the Apache Wars. So, be sure to join us next episode for part 2. But for tonight, those are other stories for other times. Apache Pass, Arizona, February 4th, 1861. As the winter wind whips around him, the legendary Apache warrior Cochise stands atop a hill overlooking the Butterfield stage station. The station has been converted to a fort by U.S. Army Lieutenant George Bascom, as he and his men hunker down in the middle of Apache country, awaiting the Apache's next attack. Down below, the young lieutenant looks up at Cochise atop the hill and feels a sickly pang of fear in his stomach. He knows why Cochise is here. In their confrontation only days earlier, Bascom had attempted to place Cochise under arrest, and while the Apache warrior had managed to escape, Bascom had managed to detain Cochise's wife, his children, his brother, and another Apache warrior. Bascom knows Cochise has returned for his wife and children, but he did not expect Cochise to come alone. Then, to his horror, Bascom realizes that the Apache warrior is not alone. A few feet behind him, tethered by a rawhide rope around his neck, is James Wallace. Wallace, a stagecoach driver who had been with Bascom and his men before being captured by Cochise in an ambush, is virtually bereft of clothing in the freezing Arizona mountain air, and he is clearly terrified. Only weeks earlier, he had been on peaceable terms with Cochise, but now he knows that he will serve as the scapegoat for Cochise's rage if a deal for his release is not struck. His only hope for survival is for Bascom to acquiesce to Cochise's terms and to trade his safe return for the return of the Apache hostages. Cochise now shouts down to Bascom, declaring his terms through interpreter John Ward. Ward is, ironically, the father of the boy Cochise has been falsely accused of having kidnapped. But Cochise has protested his innocence and repeatedly told Bascom that he does not have the boy. He has told them, quite truthfully, that he did not take Felix Ward, that it was likely the neighboring Cayutero who have taken him, and that he is in fact willing to venture to the Cayuteros' homelands in order to barter for Felix Ward's return. Bascom, however, has refused to believe any of this. He again insists that the only way that he will return with Cochise's family and fellow Apache is with the return of the Ward boy. To Wallace's absolute horror, he rejects Cochise's terms for his return. Cochise, notorious amongst his people for having a volatile temper, now stalks off, roughly dragging the terrified Wallace behind him. Back inside their ad hoc fort, Bascom struggles with the difficult decision he has just made. But he feels assured that he has made the correct decision. His orders as an officer are to find the missing boy and to return him to his father. If he relinquishes his hostages now, he will give up his only leverage in negotiations for the return of Felix Ward. He will also sacrifice the only impetus that Cochise has not to attack them. Though he is a graduate of West Point, the 24-year-old Bascom is still inexperienced in frontier warfare, and unaware that the Apache are not known to make large, head-on attacks in the vein of Napoleonic warfare. Thus, he believes that a large Apache attack may come at any time, and that the only way to prevent himself and his men from being completely overrun is to hold on to their hostages until reinforcements can arrive. And, in point of fact, this is the most prudent option for Bascom to take, considering his current position and his training. But his lack of understanding of the nuances of the Apache tribe, of the workings of Apache warfare, and of the nature of Cochise himself, have now put him and his men in an incredibly dangerous position. And they have all but sealed the fate of James Wallace. Cochise now returns to the Chiricahua camp. Fuming, he assembles his warriors and heads out to intercept the 2 incoming stagecoaches that will soon be making their way to the stage station that now houses Bascom and his men. The events of the past 48 hours have, for all intents and purposes, occurred in a vacuum, with the outside world, including the stagecoach teamsters that work for the Butterfield line, having no idea that anything out of the ordinary has occurred here. Now, Cochise and his men seek to cut them off before they reach the station, to loot their cargo, and, most importantly, take every American that they can hostage. Cochise reasons that if Wallace alone is not enough to sway Bascom in negotiating for the return of Cochise's family, perhaps adding in a few more Americans will sweeten the deal. But he faces a dilemma. There are only enough Chiricahua warriors to hold up one target at a time. Cochise will have to decide whether to stage his attack on the eastern or the western entrance of Apache Pass. After a brief consideration, he chooses to first set up an ambush on the eastbound wagon train that has been spotted inside the western entrance. The wagon train, composed of 5 wagons, 9 Mexican teamsters, and 3 American teamsters, is headed for Pinos Altos, New Mexico. They are just over 2 miles from the stage station when Cochise and his warriors attack. The Chiricahua ambush the teamsters, pouncing from behind boulders and brush. For their part, the teamsters are caught completely off guard by the attack. The 3 Americans are apprehended and detained under the watchful eye of Apache guards. After this, Cochise and his men take this opportunity to unleash at least some of their wrath by torturing the remaining Mexican teamsters. The Apache hatred for the Mexican government, its military, and its citizens runs deep throughout nearly every band, from the Coyochero to the Mescalero to the Chiricahua. Their encroachment into Apache lands, their mistreatment of Apache people, and their stealing of Apache livestock has garnered them great animosity amongst the people. Thus, Cochise and his men take great pleasure in tying the unfortunate teamsters to the wheels of their wagons upside down, with their heads hanging down close to the ground. Underneath the unfortunate men's heads, small fires are lit, and the Americans are forced to watch as their cohorts meet a horrific, torturous end at the hands of the Apache. Finally, when the screams of the dying men have faded, Cochise and his warriors return to their camp with these 3 new prisoners in tow. Here, Cochise orders James Wallace to write a letter to Lieutenant Bascom, stating that Cochise now has 4 American prisoners with which to trade for the release of his family. He adds that they will be treated well so long as his family and the other prisoners are treated well. He then takes the letter and ties it to a nearby bush in plain sight of the soldiers who will doubtless come through this area. By most accounts, one of Bascom's men brings the letter to Bascom by nightfall of the same day. But after reading the letter, Lieutenant Bascom is still unmoved. He remains steadfast in his assertion that if he gives up his prisoners now, he will not only lose face with his superiors, he will remove any and all motivation that the Chiricahua have to not simply kill every American still here at the stage station. And, again, considering the training that Bascom has received thus far, this is the correct choice to make. But, again, Bascom fundamentally misunderstands the nature of Apache warfare. Cochise is, indeed, reluctant to attack the stage station that houses the American troops, so long as they hold his friends and family hostage inside. However, this does not limit his options for violence, as Bascom assumes that it does. It, in fact, expands them. If Cochise cannot wreak havoc on Bascom and his men, he will wreak havoc on any surrounding Americans that he can find. He and his men now return to the western entrance of Apache Pass and, in the wee hours of the following morning, intercept the eastbound Butterfield stagecoach. The stagecoach driver, a Butterfield employee by the name of King Lyons, is the first to spot the burned-out remains of the wagon attack that had occurred the previous afternoon. Then, he spots the smoldering remains of the tortured Mexican teamsters. Horrified, he alerts the conductor, William Buckley, who is seated on the buckboard next to him. Moments after Buckley lays eyes on the scene, the surrounding landscape explodes in a torrent of Apache bullets and arrows. In the initial volley, one of the mules pulling the stage is hit and killed, and King Lyons is wounded. In the midst of continued Apache fire, Buckley now jumps down and cuts the dead mule loose. He then jumps back up on the buckboard and helps the injured Lyons down and into the stage itself. As he does this, the passengers inside the stagecoach begin to unleash their own volley of gunfire. On board is 2nd Lieutenant John Rogers Cook of the 8th Infantry, who pours fire out of the stagecoach window towards the muzzle flashes of the Apache rifles. Across from him, A.B. Culver, brother of the injured teamster Charles Culver, fires his revolver out of the other window. In the midst of this hellacious fight, William Buckley miraculously manages to jump back onto the buckboard, grab the reins, and hurriedly drive the stagecoach the remainder of the way to the stage station. Here, A.B. Culver is reunited with his injured brother Charles, and 2nd Lieutenant John Rogers Cook is able to confer with his fellow officer in Lieutenant John Bascom as to just how they came to be here and as to what they should do next. As the sun begins to rise, it is agreed that their next course of action should be to procure more water for their animals. This treacherous journey to the nearest spring, roughly 1,000 yards away, is a necessary evil for the troops who lead the animals, as it seems every passing second might bring on another Apache ambush. But again, the animals are watered, and the troops return without encountering any Chiricahua. This, to be sure, is a good thing, but it leaves every man at the station, especially Bascom, wondering exactly what the Apaches' motivations were in attacking the stage station, but not attacking the water detail. Though they do not know it, Cochise and his men have left Apache Pass, but they have not left for long. Cochise and his men, with their captives in tow, had retreated back to the Chiricahua's main village in order to spirit the women and children south into the Chiricahua Mountains in order to keep them safe from the fighting to come. But they have now put together a plan of attack and are now on their way back to Apache Pass in order to carry it out. At the same time, back at the stage station, Bascom, Cook, and every man present know that they are undoubtedly trapped and that they are in dire need of assistance. It is determined that a rescue party must be sent out into the dark and through the heart of Chiricahua territory. A.B. Culver volunteers to make this trip, as do a number of Army volunteers. Their plan is to travel part of the way as one unit, after which Culver will divert his course to Tucson and the soldiers will continue on to nearby Fort Buchanan. Culver and the soldiers depart in the middle of the night on what must no doubt be a terrifying passage eastward through Apache Pass. But they travel unbothered, for though the Americans do not yet know it, the Apache are now focusing their efforts on positioning themselves for the upcoming attack on the stage station. Though these kind of attacks are by and large not part of Apache's strategy, Cochise and his men plan to use divergence and cunning to overtake the soldiers and then to retake their captives. Their plan is to attack the next morning's water detail and to lure Bascom into sending out reinforcements. And when he does, Cochise and a party of warriors will attack the weakened fort and bring Cochise's family and the remainder of the hostages to safety. Before dawn, the Chiricahua take up their positions, again crouching down behind boulders, trees, and fallen logs. The falling snow also presents another challenge, as the warriors must take care to leave as little trace of their footprints as possible. But the Chiricahua are masters at this, and when dawn finally breaks and Sergeant Robinson again leads a scouting detail outside of the bounds of the station, he and his men find no Apache tracks en route to the nearby spring. Thus, Robinson and his men assume that, like the prior morning, the Apache have chosen not to attack for whatever reason. The sergeant now marches up to the top of a nearby hill and signals back to the men at the stage station that all is clear. Now, Bascom orders the vast majority of their mules and horses, 56 in total, to be sent out to the spring in order to be watered. The animals are then led out to the spring by another small detail of soldiers. But just as they arrive at the spring, the Apache unleash the first phase of their attack, in a scene that is, at this point, not wholly unfamiliar to these soldiers and teamsters. Their surroundings suddenly erupt in a cacophony of war cries and gunshots. A force of what later reports will estimate to be around 200 Apache now pour arrows and bullets into the group of roughly 20 soldiers and teamsters. Not long into the attack, Sergeant Robinson is hit in the right leg, the ball entering his leg near the knee and exiting just above his ankle. He hobbles over to a nearby cactus, where, in tremendous pain, he now sits down and continues to fire and reload his weapon. Somehow, though countless bullets manage to just miss him, Robinson manages to mount a staunch defense despite being wounded and unable to stand. Not long after this, the Butterfield stagecoach driver, King Lyons, who had already been injured during Cochise's attack on his stagecoach, is cut down and killed. Seeing all of this unfold, Lieutenant John Cook, the only other officer on hand besides Bascom, and, in point of fact, the ranking officer, leads a rescue party out of the stage station to reinforce the men at the spring. As they head towards their comrades at the spring, the Apache begin to drive the entire herd that they had been watering at the spring into the surrounding hills. There is now a scene of complete, unadulterated chaos unfolding at the site of the spring, and this is exactly what Cochise had planned. Now, Cochise and a group of his warriors charge towards the depleted stage station, intending to overrun Bascom and his men. But it soon seems that Cochise and his men have miscalculated the force of the U.S. Army firepower inside the stage station. The first attack made by Cochise's party is quickly rebuffed, and soon all of the Apache can see that the American position is too strongly entrenched to be overrun. Before long, the warriors creating the distraction at the spring make a retreat, seeing their efforts to be in vain. Cochise and his force that have directly attacked the stage station also soon abandon their pursuit and meld back into the surrounding landscape. Now, Lieutenant Cook, Sergeant Robinson, and the other men at the spring return to the stage station, with the body of the unfortunate King Lions in tow. But it seems now to Bascom and Cook alike that they have, all things considered, managed to secure some measure of success in driving the Apache away. Now, it seems that Cochise will be forced to the bargaining table and that the Americans hold the resounding upper hand in their negotiations. And this, they assume, means that reaching a deal for the return of Felix Ward and James Wallace will now be the only presumable conclusions to these events. But, again, Bascom and company have failed to fully understand Cochise's perspective on the matter. Bascom imagines that even if Cochise does not have possession of the kidnapped farm boy and Felix Ward, he certainly will not want to further compromise the negotiations for the return of his own family by doing anything to harm James Wallace, who is now his only bargaining chip. While this is, to be sure, a reasonable assumption to make, it does not take into account Cochise's capacity for rage, for inhumanity, and for spectacle. Cochise and his warriors now return to their camp, where James Wallace and the other American prisoners are being held. Here, he and the other Chiricahua summarily torture and then execute and then mutilate every single one of them. The horrific tortures that these Americans had seen carried out on their Mexican comrades were now carried out on the Americans themselves. And doubtless, their knowledge of what is in store adds to their terror. Once this grisly task is finished, the bodies are dumped in a strategic spot, just next to the site of the previous day's wagon train massacre, where they are sure to be discovered by any patrols in the area. But patrols of any kind would be delayed for several days, as the situation back at the stage station continues to develop. On Sunday, sorely needed reinforcements and medical care would come with the arrival of Assistant Sergeant Bernard J.D. Irwin from Dragoon Springs. And, much to Bascom's surprise, they have also brought with them 3 Apache captives, likely Coyotero but possibly Chiricahua, whom Irwin has intercepted and taken prisoner after they were caught driving a herd of stolen cattle northward from Mexico. It is a virtual certainty that these 3 Apache have had no idea at all of the events unfolding here at Apache Pass, but now they find themselves unfortunately and inextricably involved. But even though Bascom now has 3 additional prisoners to use in negotiating with Cochise, Cochise himself is nowhere to be found. While most of his fellow warriors have returned to their villages after the execution of the captives, Cochise, in all likelihood, has not. He is most likely still somewhere in the surrounding hills, keeping a close eye on the stage station, doing his best to ensure the humane treatment of his captured family. Wherever he is, from whatever vantage point he is watching, Cochise's frustration must continue to grow as he watches greater numbers of reinforcements arrive. Within a few days' time, Lieutenant Isaiah Moore arrives, commanding 70 heavily armed dragoons. After Moore's arrival, he and Bascom begin mounting small-scale patrols throughout the area in attempts to ascertain the whereabouts of Cochise and his warriors. But it will not be until Monday, February 18th, that the bodies of the American hostages will be discovered. The mutilation wrought upon the body of James Wallace in particular is so profound, he is only able to be identified by his gold teeth. When this is reported to Lieutenants Moore, Cook, and Bascom, Moore, the longest tenured lieutenant, and thus now the senior officer in command, orders that the Apache hostages all be brought to the site where the bodies have been discovered and hanged. Though several accounts hold that Bascom in fact argues against this course of action, he is quickly overruled by Lieutenant Moore. Thus, a grim contingent of soldiers and prisoners, including the 3 newly taken Apache captives and Cochise's wife and children, heads back out of the stage station the next morning en route to the execution site. When they arrive, the men are separated from Cochise's wife and children, and Bascom is charged with the unenviable duty of informing them, by way of an army interpreter named Antonio, that they are all to be executed by hanging. With this, a variety of responses pour forth from the condemned prisoners. Some cry out for mercy, some request to be shot instead, and one contentedly accepts his fate, noting with resigned satisfaction that he has killed 2 Mexicans this month and thus is a happy man. They all request at least a swig of whiskey before their earthly departure, but all are soundly refused. In a matter of minutes, the men are all dead. Sergeant Robinson's account of carrying out the execution recalls that the men were, quote, hoisted so high by the infantry that even the wolves could not touch them. Meanwhile, Cochise's wife and children watch on, horrified and undoubtedly assuming that they are to be next. But it has been determined that they are to be taken to nearby Fort Buchanan and released, hopefully to serve as harbingers to their people of what the U.S. Army is capable of should they be crossed. As for Cochise's part, there are conflicting theories as to whether or not he watched the event unfold. Certainly, it is possible, as one of the executed men was his brother, Coyuntera. But his own account leaves a significant level of ambiguity, recounting that, quote, 6 Indians, one of them my brother, were murdered. Their bodies were hung up and kept there until they were skeletons. As renowned author Terry Mort posits in his book, The Wrath of Cochise, this may indicate that Cochise in fact was not present to witness the executions, as Apache burial customs, extremely important within the tribe, would not allow Cochise to simply let his brother and fellow Apache deteriorate into skeletons if he had been anywhere in the area. In either case, where there had once been a sense of ambivalence and even mutual understanding, a true sense of hatred for the Americans and for the U.S. Army has now been imbued into Cochise and into his people. These events of the past few weeks, known to history as the Bascom Affair, will go down as the unofficial but undeniable catalyst that would spark the decades-long, horrifically violent Apache Wars. For Lieutenant Bascom's part, he will never see the full consequences of his actions in Apache Pass, as he will be killed in action against Confederate forces almost exactly 1 year later on February 21st of 1862 at the Battle of Val Verde in New Mexico. Cochise will continue to wage war on the Americans, along with other Apache who will go down in history as some of the most formidable native warriors the Army will ever face. Men like the massive, legendary chief Mangus Coloradus, and a younger warrior by the name of He Who Yawns, who will go on to be known as Geronimo. The captured boy, Felix Ward, will go on to live with his captors, the Cayotero Apache, for many years until being returned to the Americans. Ward will go on to work for the U.S. Army as an Apache scout under the name of Mickey Free. He, too, will go on to be one of the most legendary figures in the history of the Old West. But the many tales from the Apache Wars, from the life of Cochise, and from the wild, storied life of Mickey Free are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Southeastern Arizona, July 15, 1862. As the summer sun reaches its noontime apex, a group of 140 U.S. Army soldiers straggle through a narrow pass in search of a freshwater spring known to be in the area. All of them know that this is a very dangerous place to be, as the Apache, the most feared and powerful tribe in this area, have been known to ambush their enemies in just such a place as this. But the heat is brutal, and these men and their horses are thirsty. If they do not drink soon, they may very well perish. So they continue on, with every sound that echoes off the steep walls of the pass, causing many troopers to flinch nervously, as their eyes continually sweep the hillsides around them. But so far, there has been no sign of the Apache, and the soldiers are almost to the springs. All among them can nearly taste its cold, clear waters finally slaking their thirst. Then, suddenly, the landscape around them explodes in gunfire and war cries. It is the Chiricahua Apache, led by Chief Mangus Coloradus and his son-in-law, Cochise. They have painstakingly planned this ambush, and now it seems that it will result in a great victory against these soldiers whom the Apache refer to as White Eyes. From the vantage point of the Apaches in the hills surrounding the pass, the soldiers appear like a scattering group of prey animals. From the soldiers' vantage point, the Apaches are seemingly everywhere, hundreds of them, and now the soldiers are trapped. The Apache are not only atop the hills to their left and to their right, but they have blocked the soldiers' route to the springs. Their commanding officer, Captain Thomas Roberts, knows that many of his men are already on the verge of dying of thirst, and that a retreat back across the parched desert will likely kill many of them. Thus, his order goes out. The men will stay and fight. But the arrows and bullets raining down upon them soon prove to be too much for them to hold their position, and Roberts orders the men to move back towards the entrance of the pass. With every passing minute, it seems more and more likely to Mangus Coloradus and Cochise that their plan has in fact worked. Mangus Coloradus, or Red Sleeves, was given his name by another long-time Apache enemy, the Mexicans. Born in 1795, he had risen to this position via hard combat and steadfast leadership. Standing roughly 6'6", Mangus is much taller than his contemporaries and has risen to prominence via his fearsome, fearless conduct in the ongoing wars the Apache fought with the Americans, the Mexicans, the Spanish, and rival tribes such as the Navajo and the Comanche. In 1837, his predecessor had been murdered by Mexican bandits and scalped in order to reap the bounty the Mexican government had offered for Apache scalps. Mangus's first order of business as a newly appointed chief was to wreak absolute havoc upon the perpetrators of the murder, raiding Mexican settlements and farms throughout the territories of what was then northern Mexico. He had joined with another Apache chief named Cuchillo Negro, or Black Knife, in order to effectively hold the entire town of Santa Rita hostage, after some of their silver miners' citizenry had killed a number of Apache. The Apache's disdain for the Mexican government ran so deep that in 1846, during the Mexican-American War, the Apache promised American troops safe passage on their way south to battle Santa Anna's army. In the 1850s, tensions had continued to rise between the Americans and the Apache, culminating in smaller-scale engagements like the 1854 Battle of Ojo Caliente, in which the Army had engaged a band of roughly 150 Apache warriors, killing 5 and wounding 6. But still, Mangus, now around 70 years old, had sought to let prudence be the better part of valor, and had argued and worked for some kind of agreeable peace with the Americans. Though still a revered and fearsome war chief, he had seen enough death and suffering in his time to seek to avoid it whenever possible. But in December of 1860, a group of 30 miners had attacked a small Apache camp, killing 4 warriors, wounding several others, and taking 13 women and children prisoner. This would prove to be the final straw for Mangus Coloradus, and the imposing chief would, from then on, conduct his raiding upon the Americans with as much voracity as he had against the Mexicans. In 1860, one of Mangus's daughters, Dos Tese, married a promising young warrior who had managed to garner the approval of her legendary father. This warrior was Cochise. In early 1861, Cochise and a band of young warriors had been falsely accused by a local army official of kidnapping a 12-year-old boy. The boy had, in fact, been taken by another group of Apaches belonging to the Cayotero band, but the prevailing sentiment amongst the officers was that Cochise and his men were guilty, if not of this particular crime, then certainly of some other. In their efforts to arrest him, the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, had ordered Lieutenant George Bascom to take his men into the Chiricahua Mountains and to kill or capture any Apache they could find, by any means necessary. But, realizing that it would be next to impossible to hunt the Apache down in their own territory, Bascom had instead resorted to inviting Cochise and his followers to a supposedly peaceful meeting. Cochise, living far away from both the ranch where the attack had occurred and from the homelands of the Cayotero Apache, had no knowledge that the attack had even occurred, and was under the impression that this was to be a meeting to speak about coming to peace with the U.S. government. In fact, he had felt so assured of his safety that he had come to the meeting with his brother, 2 of his nephews, his wife, and 2 children. This would prove to be a dire mistake. Under a flag of truce, Bascom would invite Cochise into his tent, under the auspices that they would discuss the possibility for peace between their 2 peoples. But once they were inside the tent, Bascom immediately began to accuse Cochise of kidnapping the young boy. Cochise, having no knowledge that the attack had even occurred, vehemently denied any involvement in the incident. But Bascom did not believe him. And, in short order, 2 guards moved to arrest and detain Cochise. In response to this, the Apache warrior quickly pulled his knife and slashed open the back wall of the tent, diving through the hole and running in a zigzag pattern to avoid the soldiers' gunfire before escaping into the hills. But while Cochise had evaded arrest, Bascom still had custody of his brother, his nephews, and his wife and 2 children. In retaliation, Cochise had quickly organized a series of raids and taken hostages of his own. He had hoped to use these hostages to bargain for the release of his family, but although his wife and children would later be released, Bascom would refuse to negotiate for the release of Cochise's brother and nephews, all of whom would eventually be executed by hanging. In retaliation for this, several of Cochise's captives were killed as well, reportedly via torturous ends, being stabbed or roasted alive. These events, known to history as the Bascom Affair, would cause a complete breakdown in relations between the U.S. and the Apache. Throughout the spring of 1862, Cochise, Mangus Coloradus, and their warriors had raided the surrounding countryside relentlessly. Countless homesteads were destroyed, and countless numbers of settlers in remote areas met horrific ends at the hands of the Apache. But as the raiding intensified, the U.S. Army was less and less capable of pursuing and engaging the Apache. This was due to the ongoing American Civil War, which now engulfed the attention of the entire nation. While much of the fighting was taking place east of the Mississippi, the war did in fact spill all the way into the American Southwest. In fact, it is the entire reason that these U.S. Army troops have come to Apache Pass in the first place. They are on a march eastward, intent on driving Confederate forces out of the territory. In fact, just prior to beginning their march towards Apache Pass, they had driven Confederate forces from the city of Tucson without a shot being fired. But in their pursuit of the Confederates, U.S. Army officers had sought out these springs at Apache Pass as a waypoint at which to slake their men's thirst and to provide a respite from their incessant, exhaustive desert march. These soldiers, comprised of 116 troops from the 1st California Infantry and 22 cavalrymen from the 2nd California Cavalry, have already marched hundreds of miles, with hundreds more to go. They are, in fact, a scouting party sent out in advance of the main force in order to reconnoiter the location and determine the suitability of the watering hole for a force of nearly 2,000 men who have remained behind at nearby Dragoon Springs. Now, they find themselves fighting against an Apache force that outnumbers them nearly 2-1, and also occupies the high ground all around them. But for all that the soldiers lack in numbers and tactical position, their one hope lies in their superior firepower. In addition to their infantry and cavalrymen, they have also brought with them 2 mountain howitzer field cannons. These cannons, carried in segments on the backs of 3 to 4 mules, could rapidly be assembled and brought to bear against enemy forces. Though not as large as traditional field cannons, they are far more mobile and adaptable to quick use in battle. Now, with the center of Apache Pass appearing more and more like a certain death trap, Captain Roberts orders his men to retreat to the mouth of the pass and make ready the howitzers. With bullets and arrows raining down all around them, the artillery crew hurriedly works to assemble and load the artillery weapons, as their comrades in arms provide covering fire against the Apache warriors that they are scarcely able to see. Finally, though, the howitzers are loaded, and Roberts orders the first volley against the Apache to be unleashed. With a cacophonous roar, the howitzers fire. But with the Apaches ensconced high up on the hillsides surrounding them, this first attempt proves to be futile, as the angle is too steep for the howitzers to reach their targets. The first 2 12-pound cannonballs simply slam into the ground well below the Apache. But the troops, knowing that these howitzers are now their only hope of getting out of Apache Pass alive, hurriedly reposition the cannons, moving them even farther back towards the entrance of the pass. Moments later, another roar rings out from the howitzers, and this time 2 Apache positions are hit directly. For the Apache, this is the first time they have seen the howitzers in use. While they have seen the use of field artillery by the Spanish and the Mexicans in the preceding decades, artillery of this power and mobility is something altogether new and undoubtedly unsettling. But these warriors, fighting under the revered leadership of both Mangus Coloradus and Cochise, and intent on exacting their revenge upon the Americans, refuse to retreat from their positions. And so, for the remainder of the afternoon and nearly until the sun has fully set, the fighting continues, with the Army soldiers pouring artillery fire into the Apache ranks, and the Apache moving from position to position behind the rocks and crags of the hills, taking shots at the soldiers whenever an opportunity arose. Finally, though, as darkness falls over the desert, the Apache disappear into the landscape, leaving the exhausted, thirsty, and hungry soldiers to finally have access to the waters of Apache Springs. As the moon rises, Captain Roberts cautiously allows his men to advance to the spring, and finally, When it seems as though the Apache have indeed retired from the fight, he allows his men to drink from the springs and to enjoy a meal in the cool of the night. The next morning, before Captain Roberts and his men are able to move out and head back to the main contingent of Army soldiers at Dragoon Springs, Mangus Coloradus, Cochise, and their Apache warriors again line the hillsides surrounding the pass. But this time, loath to endure another prolonged and costly fight, they soon meld into the rocks and hillsides again, retiring from the fight for good and returning to their camp to reorganize and refit for another chance at the Americans. Captain Roberts and his men will reach Dragoon Springs later this evening and report their narrow escape to their unnerved comrades, who now realize that the ongoing Civil War is no longer the only conflict they will have to worry about. In the end, 2 American soldiers would be killed and 2 wounded, as well as roughly 10 Apache killed and an unknown number wounded. This battle, what will come to be known to history as the Battle of Apache Pass, marks a true escalation in the war between the U.S. Army and the Apache people, one that will carry on for decades to come. This war will result in some of the most brutal fighting in American history, with countless lives lost on both sides. For their parts, Mangus Coloradus and Cochise will pass into legend as 2 of the most important leaders in the history of the Apache tribe. However, neither of their roads will be easy. In 1863, Mangus will be killed by American soldiers in a horrific incident marred by deception, cruelty, and an unnerving fascination with the macabre. For his part, Cochise will go on to fight the Army for another decade, before ultimately retiring to the short-lived Chiricahua Reservation in Arizona, where he died of natural causes in 1874. But the countless legendary exploits of both Mangus Coloradus and Cochise, as well as the countless battles fought in the decades-long war between the U.S. Army and the Apache, are far too numerous to cover in one episode. For tonight, those are other stories for other times. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes, as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the join button down below. Also, be sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram, and subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.